Okay, hi everyone. This is a big order for me to talk about the entire Executive Order 80, and so I hope I can give you some insight into it. Also, I have big news that I have now joined the State Energy Office, and I'll be working directly with Sushma Mazemore on energy issues for the state. I just started, so I don't have a real idea of what exactly I'll be doing, but I know some of the same things I did in DAQ I will continue on doing for at the State Energy Office, and getting into more energy oriented things. So I'm very excited about that opportunity. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Executive Order 80. It's been out for a while now. So I've just kind of given the overview of it on these first couple of slides. So the order gives some goals for the state to achieve by 2025, specifically to reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 2005 levels, and to reduce energy consumption in state-owned buildings by 40% from 2003 levels. And the previous goal was 30% reduction, so we upped that by about 10%. Another goal is to increase the number of registered ZEVs, or zero emission vehicles, to at least 80,000, and to incorporate climate resilience planning into policy programs and operations of cabinet agencies. And also to grow the state's economy, of course, and make North Carolina a leader in clean energy solutions. It's a small thing to do all these things. So just to give you an idea of how this is set up, there's a climate change interagency council, which is composed of the secretary of each cabinet agency or a designee and a representative from the governor's office. The chair is Secretary Regan at DEQ, and there's a variety of council duties, including recommending goals and updating goals and actions to meaningfully address climate change, to develop programs and activities that support mitigation and adaptation, to consider stakeholder input when developing these programs and activities, and of course to schedule and monitor and provide plans required by the second, and to submit all these plans. So agencies or all the agencies that are partaking in EO80. And specific directives in EO80, and this is what I'm going to focus on. These are sort of the work products that we've put out so far. So first, all of these products are now currently available, which I'm really proud to say, and I know Sushma Mazemore is really proud of this too. We had the greenhouse gas inventory, which was released in January of 2019, the Clean Energy Plan, which was released in October of 2019, along with the Zero Emission Vehicle Plan from the Department of Transportation, Workforce Assessment from the Department of Commerce, the Comprehensive Energy, Water Use, and Utilities Conservation Program. That is the state buildings program, and that is while, but like I said, they've updated it to increase the goal by 10%. Just this month, the North Carolina Risk Assessment and Resiliency Plan was released, which was a huge undertaking for the state. So first, the GHG, and I was involved in this pretty heavily. This gives you an idea, a very quick overview of where things are. Of course, you all know through various presentations people have given that we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions significantly over the course of the last 10 years, especially with the transition to natural gas. And here's a snapshot of where we were in 2017, and this is just about where we are again today. Things may have changed a little bit, but not significantly. So electricity consumption still remains our highest GHG. Transportation. And then there's site industrial combustion, followed by agriculture, waste management, industrial processes, and natural gas and oil systems, distribution pipelines, those kind of things. And lastly, currently we are sequestering use changes in the forestry sector. This is kind of a new part of our inventory, and right now it consists mostly of sequestration due to forestry practices. And then on the avoiding a 4 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. So that's really great. That's 8% of our EGU emissions in 2018. So we should be very proud of that. So this is an overview of the Clean Energy Plan. And as you can see, there's the plan, and then there's a lot of other parts of that give background information, historical information, including on energy resources, and electricity rates and energy burden. Of course, there's a discussion of the stakeholder engagement process, the energy and emissions modeling that we're and a clean energy jobs and economic outlook. It's a lot of reading. It's like 1,000 pages, and I can help anybody if they're interested in any particular aspect of the clean. Get into. There's a lot in here. So the development of the Clean Energy Plan was about a year-long process. It involved 6 in-person meetings in Raleigh with about 80 stakeholders showing up for each meeting, I'd say on average. It also involved 11 different regional listening sessions where we went out to various communities and had kind of what I would say is we presented information and then we took feedback from the stakeholders. And there was also an online portal. So this involved a lot of stakeholder engagement, probably some of the most engagement that's happened in the state to date. And of course, like I said, there was a lot of technical analysis on different issues and historical data that back up parts of the plan. So, then of course there's the development of the recommended actions, which was done by stakeholders with some assistance from DEQ and other state experts. And these involved policies, regulatory changes, rule changes, incentives, carbon markets, implementation funds, a lot of different aspects. But I think it's really important to understand that the stakeholders drove the development of all of these recommendations. So these are some of the stakeholder values that came out through our listening sessions, online portal, and the in-person meetings. So 20% of the stakeholders valued carbon reduction and environmental issues. And then 7% of the stakeholders felt that affordability, reliability, and environmental justice were priority areas. And 5% of stakeholders were interested in economic growth, equity, utility compensation being aligned with public interest, which gets into performance-based rates and efficiency. And then lesser concerns were public health, innovation, and resiliency. So it gives you an idea of what people are interested in the state overall. So using this information and other engagement processes, North Carolina's energy future from the stakeholders' point of view. And that is a clean, equitable, modern, resilient, and efficient system that is also safe, affordable, and reliable. Piece of cake, right? So this involves increasing development of grid scale and distributed RE and other innovative technologies. It also, stakeholders wanted more options and control over their energy use, supply, and specifically their data. And it also, stakeholders wanted equitable access to both renewable and energy efficiency opportunities. Fair rate for these is our standard generation changes over time. In 2005, we were at 63% fossil fuel with only 4% renewable, and a large chunk, 31%, is nuclear. Of course, nuclear hasn't changed much over time. However, what has changed, if I can see it, there we go, I'm going to move a box here, is that fossil fuels have decreased and renewables have increased. I'd say today we're closer to 10%, but I can only go up to 2018 because DOE did a lot of estimates for renewables in 2019 rather than getting actual data. So I don't feel that that's been appropriate to show a significant amount of the data for renewables being estimated. So it shows 2018. I don't have a feel for whether they're going to update it or just maintain those as estimates. There we go. So let me move this here. So here are the recommendations. This is kind of gives you the strategy areas for all the recommendations. I'm just going to which are carbon reductions, utility incentives and comprehensive system planning, grid modernization and resilience, clean energy deployment and economic development, equitable access and just transition, and energy efficiency, as well as beneficial electrification. So the first three are areas that we are currently working on. And probably the most discussed recommendation is a goal that DEQ set to reduce CO2 emissions, I think we said greenhouse gas emissions, by 70% between 2030 and 2005 and 2030. And then a net zero goal for carbon and greenhouse gases by 2050. These are pretty steep goals, we realize, but I believe that many other utilities and states are looking at these goals as well. So I don't think that they are out of line with current thinking in our country. The second box is talks about utility incentives for recovering costs of electricity and how we could better align those with public interests, specifically social equity issues and carbon, and creating the electricity system we want, as opposed to just building out based on capital expense recovery, etc. And then the last area that is kind of I should go ahead in one box here. I'll go to this one. The last area that people are very interested in kind of an overarching recommendation is this idea of grid modernization, which I know you all are pretty familiar with, and how to create a grid that not only meets the utilities needs, but also the public interest needs. So I'm going to go back a slide. So this shows the GHG projection from our GHG emissions inventory and where that 70% reduction goal is. Can you all see my mouse? Here is kind of the area of interest. You see kind of an increase, a slight increase in GHGs as we go out toward 2030. And this is based on an AEO forecast for, I believe, 2017 that we don't believe is accurate anymore, and that we will continue to see the graph go down at a steady rate. So right now we're at about a 25% reduction from 2005 levels. And so we would expect to, that 70% reduction goal is shown here. So it's a decent amount that we still have to achieve. Another aspect of the Clean Energy Plan is the energy efficiency recommendations, which you may be interested in. These were developed separately in a whole separate stakeholder group that was run by Duke Nicholas Institute, Jennifer Weiss, and it's published in the North Carolina Energy Efficiency Roadmap. And a lot of stakeholders that are in energy efficiency specifically went, had meetings over about a 6-month period and developed over 30 recommendations for energy efficiency and creating a increase in energy efficiency in our state. The ones that are currently being worked on are listed below, and certainly education and awareness is always part of a lot of work in energy efficiency and renewable energy as well. And in addition, work is being done on creating incentives for heat water heaters. And Jennifer Weiss specifically is working on a green bank, which allows investments in energy efficiency and other green technologies that wouldn't necessarily be supported under a normal banking system. She's also working on helping her work on a data tool that would allow the state to better track how much energy efficiency is going on in the state. We have a lot of data on residential energy efficiency and spotty data on commercial and industrial data or energy efficiency. So we'd like to create a voluntary tracking tool for that, where companies that already have a sustainability report or are reporting to EPA, Energy Star, or various other, or part of the DEQ environmental stewardship program, they could all put their data in here and we collect it all in one place and have a better understanding of how much emphasis people are putting on energy efficiency in their companies and businesses. And I think we also have, the only other thing I didn't discuss is the PACE financing, which is property clean energy, where the financing for a residence or a business follows the owner of that facility rather than the owner of that facility. So that, for instance, if I wanted to put in new windows in my house, I would take out a loan, but it would be part of the house, as opposed to, when I sold the house, it would move to the new owner of the house. So let's see. As we were developing the CEP, Duke Energy came out with its own enterprise-wide goals for carbon. And those goals are similar to ours. And these are enterprise-wide, not just for North Carolina and South Carolina. And those goals are to reduce CO2 emissions by at least 50% below 2005 levels by 2030, and to achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. So they have a similar goal to us. And their first discussion of this is in their Duke Energy 2020 climate report, which I've got a link to here. And like I said, this is an enterprise-wide discussion, so it will mention a little bit and what's going on in North Carolina, but it's focused on how to do their whole fleet. From the Clean Energy Plan, the Department of Transportation developed a zero vehicle plan. A lot of the financing for this is under the VW settlement, if you are familiar with that. And of course, some of the financing would be from different sources as well. And their plan is focusing on building a corridor of charging stations, and as well as some other EVs, including education and demonstrations and building codes and things like that. So they have a significant amount of support for this, like I said, financially and policy-wise. So here's some data on the current active of ZEVs in the state. We're at about 12,000 vehicles, which is about 15% of the EO80 goal. And the number of ZEVs is about 0.4% of total vehicles in the state. So it's a pretty small amount of vehicles that we're talking about by 2025. And they're the Department of Transportation also produced a electric vehicle forecast in their ZEV plan. So I included that here. And you can see by myself, by around 2030, they anticipate us being at around 250,000 ZEVs. So that's a significant amount. That's over and above the 80,000 that that the Department of Environmental Quality or the EO80 set as a goal. So on its own, it should happen easily. However, we do need to build that, as I said, to support that work. On the fourth part of the EO80 is the Clean Energy and Clean Transportation Workforce Assessment that was conducted by the Department of Commerce. And largely they found we have the workforce and the systems in place to build the workforce that we need. However, there are always opportunities to better prepare for growth in the clean energy economy. And there are several recommendations that I included below from their report, which includes maintaining flexibility for this economy, since we don't really know what will happen in 10 years from now. We've seen such big changes and disruption in energy over the last 10 years. Therefore, we need to collaborate a lot between employers and educators to make sure we're providing the training that we need to, and to increase job opportunities and apprenticeships for developing future workers. There's a lot of case studies that are discussed. Not a lot. There's several case studies on how we're educating, how we have programs available in community colleges and universities to develop the workforce. And of course, we need to develop, leverage Department of Commerce stakeholders, including business and workforce development programs, to better support this clean economy, and to specialize in strategic sectors that we might want to focus on to become a leading clean energy state. The newest, all of those 4 parts of the EO80 were delivered in October of 2019. So the most recent deliverable was the North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resiliency Plan that was released in June. And this was another huge undertaking that involved, like I said, all of the agencies working under the Interagency Council. And in addition, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, which includes the North Carolina Forest Service, also participated in this effort, which is a significant win for our process. They have a lot of land and assets that are important for resilience in our state. So, of course, there's an executive summary, but that executive summary a lot of key findings in it. So I would urge you to take a look at that executive summary, because it's got a lot of good information in it. It's a fairly substantial summary. And then there's the plan itself. And in addition, there's several appendices, including the North Carolina Climate Science Report. So traditionally, the Climate Science Report is a regional report. However, North Carolina was able to get a team together to downsize that report to just North Carolina. So this is one of the first times we've ever had this data available at a state level. So this is a very important work product that came out of this effort. I urge you all to take a look at that as well. A part that I worked on was Appendix B, which was the North Carolina Natural and Working Lands Action Plan. So this was, I'll talk about that later. And then there were 2 regional workshops that were held to discuss resiliency within the communities, which were extremely important. And I would urge people to take a look at those as well. One was in the mountains and one was along the coast. There might have been 4 workshops in total. So this gives you kind of a structure of the report. Like I said, there's key findings and recommendations. There's a discussion of the development of the plan. And then there's a North Carolina climate report, which I urge everyone to take a look at, as well as a discussion of climate and environmental justice, which I think is equally important. Then we get into the actual risk assessment and resiliency aspects. These are the different, or I wouldn't say components, I don't want to call them sectors, but how we divided up the, I guess is the best way to say it. There was agriculture and forestry, coastal resources, commerce and business, cultural resources, ecosystems, housing, building, and support services, health and human services, which I believe also contains the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, public safety, transportation, water and land resources, and energy. And I discussed, there is this nature-based solutions to resiliency that was written by the natural working land stakeholders. And then there's a discussion of which was also very important because we were unable to complete all of the work in a year. So that path forward is also really important. What happens next? So I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the climate science report. The climate science report discusses the impacts of climate using this yellow box down here as virtually certain, very likely, likely, about as likely as not, unlikely, very unlikely, and exceptionally unlikely. And you can see all the percentages there. The virtually certain is 99 to 100% probability of outcome. And the very likely and likely are all above 50% probability of outcome. So any of these that are flagged in the report are something to take a look at closely. So it is virtually certain that sea level will continue to rise given the current climate projections. It is also very likely that summer heat index values will increase as well as total precipitation. Hurricane intensity is likely to increase along with severe droughts. The intensity of those droughts will increase. And will be likely an increase in precipitation that will also lead to inland flooding. So we've already seen that over the past few years, and there is a greater than 66% chance of that to continue in the future. And as you all know, there are non-climate stressors which you all deal with that impact these climate change hazards, including population growth, aging infrastructure, economic disparity, socio disparity, physical and cyber attacks, and other man-made disasters, rural-urban divide, and of course, pandemics and public health threats, as we're seeing today. This is a statement I put in from the climate report that I think is very important. Our scientific understanding of the climate system strongly supports the conclusion that much larger than at any time in the state's history are very likely by the end of this century. And I think as innovators and energy infrastructure supporters, we need to take this sentence very seriously in our future work. This kind of gives a state of where the resilience planning effort is. We kind of changed directions by developing the climate science report, so our process got slowed down. We have done a lot of work in exploring the hazards and the vulnerability that results from those hazards. And each of the 8 interagencies have started looking at options and to create resiliency to those vulnerabilities. And as I said, some areas already have plans and priorities in place, but everybody needs to work a lot on implementation of any resilience strategies. So that's kind of what's happening next. The last 3 bullets are what we'll be focusing on in the future. And those efforts will not be done by DEQ, but DEQ has passed on the responsibility for implementation and strategies to NCORE, the North Carolina Office of Resiliency and Recovery. So DEQ will be handing over the path forward to them. The observation, I thought those would be of most interest to you all. Of course, you all know that people work in energy resilience on a regular basis in North Carolina, so this is not brand new work for us. However, it does have some new focus, I hope. I was not part of developing these recommendations. Like I said, I focused on the natural working lands. I facilitated that group of about 100 people. So I did not participate a lot in this. Here are the observations, and that the first is that climate change must be integrated across economic sectors to develop energy solutions to any impacts from climate change. Also, there are rapid changes, as you know, happening in both the energy and electricity sector that are creating opportunities for us to build resilience via modernization of energy supply and delivery infrastructure. Lastly, resilience metrics can quantify human and economic costs of power outages. And lastly, a risk-based framework can accelerate decisions related to energy infrastructure planning and operations. I think that's a really important one for us to consider going forward. This is some of the impacts and resilience strategies that came out of this group. I'm not going to go through them all because I don't want to read this all to you all, but the important part is that disruptions to the grid from increased storm intensity were examined. The power plant cooling during drought conditions were also examined, and fuel supply chain disruptions from increased storm intensity were also examined. And these represent kind of a first cut at strategies that we would use to deal with these impacts. And lastly, the North Carolina Disaster Recovery Framework should address how to integrate resilience planning for storm-related attacks into its disaster recovery planning. That's a big mouthful, but I think all groups need to start looking at resilience planning given our recent history. Flavor of the National Working Lands work that was done, and I only put this in here because I'm going to pique some people's interest with a recommendation. Like I said, we had close to 100 experts working on this aspect of the plan. We developed 25 priority recommendations. Our primary goals were to sequester carbon and mitigate GHG emissions, but also to use natural working lands to build resilience in both communities and ecosystems. And other goals of the group provide public health and ecosystem code to create economic opportunities for agribusiness, recreation, and tourism, and to make sure that any implementation addresses social equity. It also gives our 6 focus areas: forestry, floodplains and wetlands, the coastlands, which are peatlands found along the eastern coast, coastal habitats, agriculture, and urban lands. And the recommendation that I feel that might interest some of you is that we would like to facilitate voluntary landowner participation in carbon offset and ecosystem services markets. So California and the RGGI states, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative states in the Northeast, have carbon offset markets we can access and use them to fund some of the recommendations in this plan. So I thought that might be of interest to you all. So that is it. There's a lot in here to delve into. I hope that you all take some time to look at some of the recommendations and all of these work products that the state has put out. I'm totally blown away by how much free time and expertise was given to the state under this. I don't even know how to quantify the hours. I had 100 experts working on a monthly basis, 4 to 8 hours at a minimum of admin kind of time, and then extra hours when they were working on recommendations. So it's an enormous amount of effort that was put into this plan, or these plans of EU80 that I think says a lot about our state and the people that care about what's going on.
Paul, really excellent. Thank you. You were concerned about covering an hour. You're just about there.
I know it's a lot.
I know.
I never had a chance to test it. I don't know how long it was running.
It's a lot of content and high quality, it's evident that North Carolina has really focused on this and been diligent about producing product during the last 18 months. So I'm going to ask people to consider what questions they may wish to pose you. They can do that by chat if they want to key something up, or they can simply unmic. But I'm going to ask a question while people are considering. Paula, as I understand the result of Executive Order 80, that much of the work product are plans. And as plans, they don't actually carry the force of a regulation or a policy. What do you see next? I mean, this is a huge undertaking, but what do you see next as far as how all these plans become implemented and actually produce the results envisioned here?
Well, I tried to focus when I spoke on things that were actually happening currently, like that whole list from the EU roadmap and the first three aspects of the Clean Energy Plan, the carbon reductions, and performance-based market or performance-based incentives and grid are all happening, as well as a lot of aspects of the ZEV plan, and they actually have funding to do their work as opposed to most of the others. I can't tell you how much funding came up, but we also have resources that we need to deal with, staff resources, especially considering a lot of the governor's office time is being spent on COVID. They don't have the bandwidth to support a lot of this right now. So I think it's on the agencies to push some of this work forward for the time being, and we take that very seriously. And my stakeholders take a lot of that we can continue to move forward even in this stress time. And I had a meeting today with the Natural Working Lands Group on how we're going to move forward, and everybody's really concerned about being able to take action and creatively financing some of these programs. So I have faith that that we can accomplish maybe the top three things in some of these plans would be a good goal, but I have no idea what the department feels or the governor's office feels about that. But putting it on paper helps. It gives people concrete places to turn, and all the stakeholders that can grab any one of these recommendations and start moving out on them. This is not a government-driven process. Like I said, this is a stakeholder-driven process. Therefore, we are actually relying on stakeholders to assist us with this implementation.
So
I think that's happening, actually. It is happening. Stakeholders have grabbed things and decided they're going to do it.
To elaborate on that just a bit, where as I understand, the plan is available for really anybody to act on or take responsibility for. Are there aspects of these, and there's multiple plans, are there aspects of these various plans of which you're aware that require policy action, so a change in a law or something like that? And if so, how do we go about that?
Definitely, there are parts of the plans that require legislation, and those have been identified for the most part. I'm not aware that I do know that people are working on it, so I wouldn't say that no one's working on it. but there's no formal task force or anything set up for that legislation at this point. It's all very informal. So, we can take that as a recommendation to look at prioritizing legislation perhaps. And the governor's office will do that at some point. But like I said, their focus is on COVID right now. So it's been a little difficult to gain the bandwidth we need to move forward with some of this.
I'm going to pause and see if anyone wants to unmic and ask a question. And I've got a final question if no one has one to pose.
And I think everybody's aware of some of the clean energy plan work that's going on, including stakeholder follow-up on carbon reductions and performance-based incentives. So if anybody wants to join any of those processes, you could contact me.
So Paula, my final question before we close out your segment deals with the current situation that we have. And as I've observed, we've seen that the pandemic temporarily knocked air miles down by 95%. And air miles continue to be at a much lower level than what they were back in January and February. And we see that vehicle miles were, during the height of the pandemic, knocked down 60%. And we're still operating at a reduced level of vehicle activity. I know when I do get out, which is seldom, if I drive during rush hour, there's no rush hour anymore. So I'm wondering two things. If we see that our structural pattern of life and work has really changed, and there's less fossil fuel used in the transportation sector, number one, does it cause us to rethink some of these plans? And number two, do we need to actually take advantage of some of these trends and plan some of these trends into these plans as revisions?
I think that, that we should look to these changes to say that you can restructure what you're doing quickly if you need to. And that's a good thing for us to know, especially dealing with climate issues. We can restructure, and the schools are doing that. The schools have built in these online school days now so that the next polar vortex, we may not have to close the school. We can move to online schools, which I'm sure all the kids will hate. But so I think we've already shown now, it's really great that we've shown we can do business differently quickly when given the proper motivation. And that's a really important aspect for climate resilience, I believe. And to moving to different models to lower energy use as well, that if and when we need to do it very quickly, we could do it. And so I think for me, that shows a lot of hope for our country to be more flexible in how they think. People are very, but at some point it affects everybody. And we'll see that as this pandemic goes on. I believe more and more people will get affected as we move forward with it potentially. So I don't know if we would change the plans based on it, but I certainly think that the implementation can take a broader look from this experience and say it's not as bad as we think to change the way we do business. So I would hope it comes out in the implementation aspects and potentially lower some of that would be involved.
I think also, Paula, we may find that some of these plan objectives, rather than appearing to be aspirational, subject within this new context, are real, and we may attain them sooner than what we envisioned.
Mm-hmm. For instance, we had one of our transformational goals for natural working land is sequester to protect 1 million acres of forest land. And when I sort of brought this up with the steering committee, everyone's like, no, we can't come up with that goal. That's way too high. But then we all came to find out that we'd already had 1 million acres protected previously. And so it wasn't that high of a goal. And it can be done, and it was done. And then we started looking at the numbers that are involved with recovering from the flooding that has happened, the economic and social cost of the flooding that's happened over the last few years, and it's well beyond the cost of that 1 million acres. So purchasing or conserving 1 million acres in floodplains in North Carolina is not only doable, but it would be a smart investment for anybody concerned with resiliency issues. So we've identified priority areas for that, and so I believe that coming up with some financing might not be as hard as we think.
Well, Paula,
for these big aspirational goals.
I don't see any questions queued up. You've answered all my tough questions, and we're going to thank you. And as with the other speakers, we're going to ask if we'll send you an email, but we're going to ask if your deck in some fashion could be made available to the participants today.
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Perfect. So congratulations on your new role.
Yeah, yeah.
So you did, in my opinion, you just joined a great team. And
I hope so.
I know you have. So thanks so much for being with us today.
All right, thank you for the opportunity.